I want to welcome you to the Ask Jeff YouTube channel. Here's today's question. Who was Melchizedek? Well, or as I like to call him, good old Uncle Mel. Fascinating character in the Bible. Originally shows up in Genesis chapter 14. Genesis chapter 14, Abraham goes and makes an offering to the king and to the priest of Salem, who is known as Melchizedek. Now, that ought to be your first little quote check in your spirit. Why? Because in the Old Testament, we have three functions. Obviously, Jesus fulfilled all of these. We have prophet, we have priest, we have king. You have prophets that were kings, you have priests that were prophets, but one of the things you'll discover is you never have a king who is a priest at the same time. You want a good example? Look at King Saul. He was a king, technically also a prophet as well, but when he fulfilled the role of a priest, it actually had the crown removed from him via Samuel. Now, that being said, the reason you don't see that is because it's reserved for Jesus Christ, the Messiah alone. That's important to the question. So why is it in Genesis 14 that this mysterious character known as Melchizedek shows up, who is a priest and a king of Salem, which means peace, think Jerusalem, place of peace. Why? And he receives worship. He receives tithes and offerings. Those are functions reserved for God alone. Then you go into the book of Hebrews and it talks about that Jesus' priesthood was not the Aaronic or the brother of Moses, Aaron priesthood like we see in the Old Testament, but he's after the priesthood of Melchizedek, which had neither father nor mother nor beginning nor end. So Melchizedek is this strange character that shows up in Genesis, mentioned extensively in the book of Hebrews. Now, there's a lot of options here. Option A is that he's just some random outlier historical figure that we don't know a whole lot about and we should just leave it at that. Option B is that he's actually what we would call a Christophany. You say, what's a Christophany? Well, a theophany in the Bible is when you have God himself who demonstrates himself within the creative order. Okay, so when people say they saw God. Now, again, I know the story with Moses. Nobody sees his face, but when you see God actually moving in the midst of his creation, a Christophany would be a pre-incarnate, shall we say, movement or appearance of Jesus Christ. Now, we know Jesus Christ has always been. There's never been a time he has not, but for 33 and a half years, he dwelt in flesh. Now, you have these stories such as Melchizedek. You have these stories such as the fourth man in the fire in the book of Daniel, or the captain of hosts with Joshua, where you have these situations where there's a godlike figure that even Nebuchadnezzar recognizes, but we don't know a whole lot of details. You go to the book of Zechariah, and you have this character, the angel of the Lord, that receives worship and absolves somebody of their sins. And so when we look at their characteristics, we say it just seems godlike, not manlike. Could it be? And so when it comes to Melchizedek, I would argue you have a pretty substantial case that this is the pre-incarnate Christ, hence his titles of priest and king, receiving of worship, particularly of the tithes, and then mentioned in Hebrews as Jesus being in the, quote, priestly line thereof. At the end of the day, fascinating character who's not just linked to Abraham, he's linked to Jesus himself. Great question. If you have one, send to AskJeff.net. Maybe your question be tomorrow's. Thanks for being a part of today's daily question. Now, we answer a question each and every day. Please feel free to submit a new question at AskJeff.net. We may not have gotten to yours today, but we eventually will continue to be a part of this. Subscribe so you don't miss out on a question every day.